How to freeze chanterelles so they don't turn bitter. Why are chanterelles bitter? How to remove bitterness from frozen chanterelles. Imagine this. You return from the forest with a basket full of chanterelles, feeling like the king of mushroom picking.
Hello.
You can already see that golden sauce for dinner. You taste it, and the bitterness of life hits you, literally. Relax, all is not loss. I'll tell you how to freeze chanterelles so they don't turn into nature's bitter joke. They say chanterelles are a mushroom for people with character, because they can show who's boss in the kitchen. Sometimes they're aromatic and delicate, and sometimes they can be more bitter than the comments under the vegan Bigor's recipe. Freezing chanterelles is a bit like a blind date. You never know what will come of it. It could be love at first thaw, or maybe a bitter failure. Relax, don't throw the pan out the window. I'm about to show you how to freeze chanterelles without them turning into a culinary horror movie called The Revenge of the Chanterelle. Brew some coffee and let's get started on mushroom therapy. Before you get discouraged, learn why nature decided to give these yellow wonders the personality of your morning coffee without sugar. The bitter taste of chanterelles is primarily due to fatty acid derivatives. These compounds, being natural substances, are responsible for both the slightly bitter notes and the overall impression that adds depth and richness to the chanterelle's flavor. Other volatile compounds, such as terpenes and lactones, contribute to the fruity, apricot aroma of chanterelles. The concentration of these bitter compounds may depend on storage conditions. For example, older frozen chanterelles can become more bitter after thawing. So, if you've ever picked a basket full of chanterelles, only to find a bitter delicacy after a few months in the freezer instead of an aromatic miracle of nature, welcome to the club of disappointed mushroom pickers. And that's exactly what happens. The most common cause of bitter chanterelles is overfreezing them, which is when they've been in the freezer for too long. Even well-prepared chanterelles can become bitter, not just those in bags but even those sautéed in butter with onions. I must admit that these mushrooms are unique because they aren't eaten by worms and insects, meaning they remain intact and don't spoil. The reason for this is the bitterness of the flesh, which negatively affects all parasites. It's worth noting that cleaning and any heat treatment of chanterelles should be done on the day of harvest. Any delays can lead to the accumulation of harmful toxins in the mushrooms, which can be harmful to human health. Chanterelles can become bitter due to overheating during processing, especially if fried or cooked for too long, as high temperatures destroy their enzymes. Frying chanterelles should be short, because in addition to becoming bitter, they can harden considerably. So don't fry them as if you were trying to light a fire, but rather gently, briefly, and without emotion, like a conversation with a clerk. It's best to prepare mushrooms as soon as possible. Store fresh chanterelles in the refrigerator, in a well-ventilated container, and ideally use them within 1 to 2 days. Incorrect storage conditions, such as leaving the mushrooms in a warm environment, can accelerate decomposition and affect their flavor. Older, very ripe chanterelles can sometimes have a bitter aftertaste. I'd like to point out that it's best to freeze only young chanterelles that haven't fully opened their caps. These fruiting bodies are virtually devoid of bitterness and contain more nutrients and vitamins than overripe ones. In some cases, especially in extreme weather conditions, such as severe drought, the mushrooms can be bitter. Furthermore, chanterelles can grow in coniferous forests on a bed of moss, which intensifies the bitter aftertaste. Oven drying or rehydrating chanterelles is not recommended, as high temperatures or drying can make them bitter. Although some people do this and grind them into a powder, using them as a very specific spice. It turns out that freezing chanterelles is an art. If you don't do it right, you'll end up with a soup that tastes like regret. To prevent frozen chanterelles from becoming bitter, Fresh mushrooms are usually soaked in salted water before freezing, also washing them. However, if you don't intend to freeze them and want to use them in a dish, you should place them on a towel to dry, so they don't become watery and rubbery. Freezing raw chanterelles can actually cause them to taste bitter. Freezing chanterelles without preparation is like throwing a friend into a cold lake for fun. It seems funny, but the trauma remains. Technique is key here: salt, sugar, and patience. And not, okay, I'll throw it in whenever I can. Then heat treat them before freezing, for example, by blanching them in salted water with a pinch of sugar for about 3 to 5 minutes. For 1 kilogram of chanterelles, boil 3 liters of water with 1 teaspoon of salt. And optionally, a pinch of sugar. The chanterelles should only be blanched, not cooked. After removing them, rinse them with cold water to stop the blanching process and place them on a towel to dry. Let them cool to room temperature. The drying process takes about 30 minutes. This is a crucial step to prevent condensation and ensure they don't freeze into a solid block. Transfer to airtight bags or containers, removing as much air as possible, and freeze. Removing the air prevents frostbite. The key to long-term storage is to remove as much air as possible from the packaging. Have they been in the freezer for a year? Don't be surprised if they've gone bitter. Chandeliers aren't penguins. Remember to use them within 6 to 9 months. They'll become bitter if stored longer. Don't forget about them like you did about that frozen pizza from 2018. Adding salt or sugar is essential because it prevents the mushroom walls from disintegrating and ensures their firmness. You can also prepare a ready-made dish and freeze them. Cooking should take 10 minutes to prepare them. Sauté washed and dried chanterelles in a pan with butter or oil. You can add chopped onion to them, which will additionally protect them from a bitter aftertaste. Wet mushrooms will stick together after freezing, forming ice blocks, which spoils their flavor and texture, making it difficult to remove the desired portion. Place them in bags so that there is as little air inside as possible. This prevents overfreezing. Cooked or sautéed mushrooms should be allowed to cool thoroughly before freezing. Prepare portions that can be used at once for a chosen dish, soup, sauce, or other dishes. Use them immediately after thawing. Do not refreeze thawed mushrooms. Chanterelles contain proteins that, when thawed and refrozen, become an excellent breeding ground for bacteria. Don't defrost chanterelles like a barbarian. Defrost them in a colander. Give them time, let them recover, like you do after coffee. Only then throw them in the pan. But what do you do with chanterelles that are already bitter? Can they be saved? Bitter chanterelles? Congratulations, you've joined the club called We've All Been There. Well, it happened. Your chanterelles just won the bitterest joke in the kitchen contest.
Oh, no.
But don't despair. I know a few ways to turn this failure into something you can eat without crying. How to remove bitterness from frozen chanterelles. After thawing, the mushrooms are submerged in boiling water and simmered for 10 to 15 minutes over low heat. You can add 1 tablespoon of salt and 2 to 3 pinches of citric acid to the water. This will help remove the bitter taste from the fruiting bodies. Another method is to rinse the mushrooms under running cold water after thawing. Add a small amount of water, add 1 onion, cut it into 4 pieces, and cook for 10 minutes over medium heat. Place the mushrooms in a colander, drain, and continue cooking. Then the question arises, how can you remove the bitterness from thawed chanterelles so that the dish prepared with them retains their mushroom flavor and aroma? Perhaps the mushrooms are not very bitter, and this method will suffice. In this case, blanch the mushrooms in boiling, salted water for 5 to 7 minutes, after thawing them in a colander. What if the chanterelles remain bitter after initial cooking? What should you do? There may be several reasons. For example, the individual characteristics of the fruiting bodies, the presence of toxins in the flesh, or improper processing. The natural bitter taste of chanterelles can complicate the cooking process and extend its duration. It's worth noting that although the bitterness of mushrooms isn't harmful to human health, many people dislike this taste. This is where a little alchemy comes in handy. salt, citric acid, and hope. It sounds like a recipe for an elixir of truth, but it really works. The chanterelles will relax, you'll breathe easier, and the kitchen won't explode. Therefore, to remove the bitter aftertaste from chanterelles during cooking, add salt, citric acid, bay leaf, clove buds, and allspice to the water. After the initial boil for 5 to 8 minutes, strain the water and add fresh water. They are boiled again, but without adding salt or spices. Additionally, there is a method that simplifies the task and shows how to remove the bitterness from chanterelles. After 15 minutes of boiling in salted water, the mushrooms can be cooked in a marinade or added to various sauces and fillings. This method will minimize the bitter taste of the chanterelles. However, people who rarely eat chanterelles immediately notice the bitterness. It's common for chanterelles to be bitter even after frying. Why is this? The first encounter with such bitterness can be bewildering and raise doubts about the mushroom's edibility. One possible reason for chanterelles being bitter when fried is the lack of pre-soaking, as I mentioned earlier. This problem may also stem from the mushrooms being stored for a long time after being brought home, which causes toxic substances to accumulate in the flesh. Before frying, the mushrooms are soaked, cooked in boiling salted water, and then fried. Although such processes require additional time, the bitterness characteristic of chanterelles will certainly disappear. If you decide to dry the chanterelles, they will likely be bitter, but proper preparation will help remove the bitterness. The first option is to soak the dried chanterelles in cold water with salt for 5 to 8 hours. Change the water 2 to 3 times a day to prevent the fruiting bodies from souring. The second option is to pour warm milk over the mushrooms, covering them completely, and let them soak for 2 to 3 hours. Additionally, after soaking, it's best to cook the dried chanterelles with citric acid and spices, bay leaves, cloves, and fennel. Adding these ingredients will help completely remove the bitterness from the dried chanterelles. And there you have it, your chanterelles have received a complete flavor therapy.
Hello.
If this video makes you think your chanterelle dishes will be delicious, feel free to hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, and maybe even a like. I'd be delighted. See you in the next video.